Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are joined by Brian Berletic, a former US Marine and an international security expert with focus then primarily on Eurasia. So welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me back.
So I think I probably belong to one of the people who had some initial optimism about Trump. That is, I thought he believed a bit like myself that in order to save the republic, he would have to scale back the empire and adjust to the realities, as he wasn't as consumed by the whole liberal delusion as everyone else. That is the need to have the US dominating in order for liberal democratic values to survive. Um, However, what we've now seen, of course, over the past week is first Iran being in the middle of negotiations with the United States, and then Israel launching a surprise attack on Iran with, of course, the support of the United States, and then Trump announcing he will take 14 days to think what they will do, and then also striking Iran. I mean, the level of deception and aggression is quite extreme. And again, you're one of the, I think, the main person who's been warning all along that no one should trust Trump, that this is, yeah, all, yeah, deception. And I guess, yeah, sadly, you've been correct on this. What do you make of this attack now today? I see Trump made a speech, he saved the world from an Iranian menace. He declared victory, a spectacular attack. The Iranian nuclear facilities have been completely destroyed. Uh, what do you make of, yeah, the developments today?
Um, First of all, I take no pleasure in having predicted this or, being right. I think it takes courage and integrity for people to admit that they were deceived. It's not their fault. They hoped for very positive, I would say, necessary changes to be made, both for U.S. foreign policy and in terms of geopolitics in general. So I think it's very important for people to just look at what is actually happening now and move forward from what we see happening. I still see these same people who were telling me specifically that the US was never going to attack Iran. They're now twisting themselves into pretzels to explain why the US has attacked Iran and how this is still some master plan proceeding towards peace, which it is not. This was all part of continuity of agenda. President Trump, during his first 4 years in office, helped shape the geopolitical battlefield for this very conflict. A lot of people are saying maybe this is like when President Trump murdered senior Iranian commander General Qasem Soleimani and how they allowed Iran to strike at US bases and everything cooled down. But what people seem to forget is the whole point of killing General Qasem Soleimani was to shape the geopolitical battlefield then for this very war we see escalating today. As you pointed out in your opening remark, this was a US-enabled Israeli strike on Iran. Israel would be physically, literally incapable of carrying that out without complete and constant support from the United States. I think people severely underestimate how dependent Israel is on the United States for absolutely everything. All of their missile defense systems that are parrying the Iranian retaliations to continuous Israeli and now US strikes, that was all co-developed with the United States and funded by US Congress. That was not an Israeli achievement. That was something the US gave Israel along with all of these offensive options, which, by the way, were custom tailored for this war. They are not general use military weapons and munitions that they just so happen to have on hand. They were stockpiling these probably over the course of both the Biden and now Trump administration for this very attack. So it was premeditated. And I hate to keep bringing it up, but they wrote this plan down on a piece of paper, and it has been publicly available since the year 2009. The Brookings Institution's Which Path to Persia: Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran. I have it right here. It is not a secret. It was not leaked. It was publicly available for 16 years, and they spelled it out explicitly. The U.S. would pursue diplomacy with Iran to serve as cover and to create plausible deniability for an Israeli attack. They literally have a whole chapter titled "Leave It to Bibi: Allowing or Encouraging an Israeli Military Strike," where they spell out how the U.S. would use diplomacy to distance itself from an attack they admit the U.S. would have to enable. And then they also have a whole chapter regarding U.S. airstrikes on Iran, and they have spoken about how that is not an option that would be used in and of itself. It would just be one of many options. The next step, according to this paper, is to either wait for or manufacture an Iranian provocation the U.S. can cite to widen the war even further. That's where we are right now.
Yeah, this paper is they right. I mean, they do spell everything out. It reminds me a bit about the Rand Corporation paper of 2019, where they spell out, how should we break Russia, and they do, destabilize Belarus, go for a conflict, with Armenia and Azerbaijan. Let's, weaken Russia by instigating or intensifying destabilizing the conflict in Donbass. It's yeah, knock out Syria. I mean, one after the other, they outline what they want, and then everything is framed as strategic objectives. But then, as you say, once it's implemented, it's all covered in this liberal veil of, no, well, we just wanted to help people and liberal democracy, all of this. Yeah, and it's the same now, but it does feel like we don't really stand on the strong narrative. Like, we don't have the narrative in place as we did in the past. I mean, in Iraq it was prepared well in advance, but this time around, I see the EU leaders, for example, they now, they're all saying the same thing. Well, Israel has a right to defend itself. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, but it doesn't really mean much when you launch a surprise attack and against a country which isn't developing a nuclear weapon. So the narrative isn't here. I think this is going to have major implications because whitewashing this very barbaric power politics in the veil of liberal democracy, it tended to work in the past. I just don't see it working now.
It's a very good point. And this is something that I have also been trying to bring attention to, the fact that the US is out of time. They have this plan of reasserting American, what they call leadership, I would call primacy, hegemony over the planet. And we see the growing multipolar world taking shape. We can see China rising exponentially. We can see Russian and Chinese military capabilities closing that gap, reducing the superiority of American military power. And they are out of time. If they wait a year or 5 years or 10 years more to do this, they will not have any actual opportunity to do this and possibly succeed. They may not succeed now. They may succeed now because of how brazen this is and how many people seem to have been caught off guard again, despite the plan being written on a public piece of paper for 16 years. They're rushing through this because next year, 2 years from now, we watched Iran join BRICS. We watched rail lines be built between China and Iran, military partnerships beginning to form between Iran and Russia, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The world sees what the United States is doing, what it's trying to do to reassert power. They are reacting, and there is momentum to that, and the US is desperately trying to break it. And so whether the narrative is there or not, whether it's extremely risky or not, they feel as if it's better to attempt this now than later. We can see the way they designed this conflict. It is Israel in the line of fire. Everybody tells me that Israel is the master, America is the puppet, but the US used Israel to provoke this, take responsibility for it, and absorbed the brunt of the retaliation from it. And it is a replay of what the US has done to Russia through Ukraine. And at the same time they're doing this, they are rushing to create a similar dynamic in Asia Pacific against China. So I agree with you. I don't think the narrative is quite there. The unfortunate part is, again, human nature. Many other people who placed hope and trust in President Trump and his administration, they just don't want to admit that they were wrong, even though they did nothing wrong. but they refuse to admit that they are wrong. And they are, again, twisting themselves into pretzels to defend this and to kind of create space and time for the US to advance this yet another war of aggression.
How do you assess the actual outcome of the strikes? Because as I said, Trump immediately said, "Well, it was a great success. We obliterated everything. Again, all these three nuclear facilities." Now we hear out of Iran, they're saying that they had removed much, if not all of the material in preparation, and also that the bunker busters didn't actually reach its target in Fordo, which is the really well fortified deep underground. Uh, do you have you any other information in terms of the success of the American attack?
No, not yet. And I think people should just wait, reserve judgment until more information comes out. Of course, both sides are going to say, yes, our attack was brilliant and successful. The other side is inclined to say it was not, even if it was. We have no idea of knowing. What I will say is, and again, I warned people that this was the case, having Israel carry out these strikes, one of the main reasons they did this, and one of the objectives was to shape the battlefield ahead of U.S. intervention. So we saw Israel attacking Iranian air defenses, revealing its ballistic missile capability. Maybe not all of it, but much more of it is now revealed. The capabilities. It gave the U.S. the ability to adjust its military posture in the region. We saw them moving assets back. It was so obvious they were going to attack. And as they were doing that, yes, it would make sense for Iran to begin moving anything of value out of that facility. I would not underestimate anything. The U.S. capabilities at this point is still an incredibly dangerous nation. It has an incredibly powerful military. Yes, we have talked about how overstretched it is in terms of military industrial production, but it still has immensely dangerous capability. So I would not underestimate that. And I would wait and see before we overestimate Iran's ability to weather this attack. We just simply we don't know. We don't know at this point. It's too early to tell.
After the attack, though, as he gave his victory speech, Trump, reminded me a bit about Bush hanging up the banner, yeah, mission accomplished. But then he went on to say that, well, now is the time for peace. Iran must return to negotiations. It's kind of astonishing that they were at the negotiation table when they were attacked. Um, but what do you make of this? Is this the United States or Trump's ability to strike Iran and then warn it, do not dare to retaliate? Now you'll have a chance for peace if stand down and let us bomb you without consequences. Do you see this as being, to what extent could this be successful, or do you think it's, yes, is this just a way of trying to make Iran look aggressive? Because I just can't imagine any scenario where Iran does not retaliate, even if it's against, overwhelmingly powerful United States.
Well, again, I mean, it's literally in the plan. The airstrikes are supposed to provoke any kind of response from Iran, and they even say in the paper, even if Iran doesn't attack us directly, we can take anything at all that they do, or even don't do, and assign it to Tehran and use it as a pretext to widen the war with Iran. So yes, clearly the U.S. never had any intention of coming to any sort of agreement with Iran. When we really think about it, had no right to bring this issue up with Iran in the first place. It is not the arbiter of nuclear programs in Iran or anywhere else on planet Earth except within America's own borders. The UN did not authorize this. The US has no right to involve itself in this. The whole reason for bringing this up as an issue in the first place was to create a pretext for another U.S. war of aggression, and ironically or unironically, involving weapons of mass destruction, a lie the U.S. literally told about the country next to Iran on the map. And as a matter of fact, they said the same thing about Syria. So, I mean, three nations that are very close to each other in the region, three lies, three wars of aggression. So I'm hoping many more Americans start to spot the pattern here.
Well, the Iranians said they moved their sensitive material out, but how about the Americans? Have they prepared for Iranian retaliation? I mean, how vulnerable are the Americans? They do have, I think, about 40,000 troops in the region. They sent in a lot of naval assets. In the age of hypersonic missiles, how vulnerable are they? I know this could be some speculation as well, given, we haven't seen this before. These are relatively new weapons, being employed in such a, massive war between two large powers such as the US and Iran. But how vulnerable do you assess the United States being when Iran now comes for its retaliation?
Of course, if there are any U.S. assets in range, they would be open to Iranian retaliation. The U.S. did say that they were moving, and many sources online said the U.S. was moving assets out of range of Iranian missiles. They have assets in the region, but I think part of the U.S. strategy at this point, because I think they realize that many people do see this as the invasion of Iraq 2003 all over again, WMDs all over again. A U.S. ship struck and sunk, and hundreds of unprecedented loss of life for U.S. service members might be the provocation that they're looking for to justify the war, generate support for it, and help escalate it. I saw people online, I won't mention their names, first of all, blame Iran for precipitating this unprovoked attack by both Israel and the U.S. on it. And then they said, if Iran strikes back, as is its right under international law in self-defense, the U.S. having come on the other side of the planet to provoke this war, they would stand with U.S. troops. So it is a possibility, and it is something that obviously resonates with at least some people in America and probably across the rest of the Western world.
Well, I guess as soon as there's American casualties, there's the rational instinct in human nature, it gives way to a very different instinct, which is that the group psychology. That is, when you see your team taking losses, then everything is reduced to us and them. Do you
Yes.
support our team and their team? So it could have a huge impact when, yes, well, the past is the past. Which side do we stand on? Do we stand on the side of the mullahs or the liberal democratic world? I mean, you can see why many people are even critical now, would throw their weight behind Trump if the Iranian retaliates. But again, I'm not sure how they could not. So how do you see the escalation going from here, though? What are likely American targets, and how much damage can they do? Because there's a lot of similarities or parallels drawn to Iraq, but in Iraq, the United States had a massive land army which were brought in, but Iran is it's very difficult to reach. For all it's built geographically like a fortress with the sea and the mountains. They're almost four times the territorial size of Iraq, twice the population, and also the United States doesn't have the troops there. So, and even some of the technical superiority they enjoyed over Iraq don't really have the same over Iran. So, how much pain can the United States bring to Iran at this point, given that not just the US but its NATO partners already shipped a lot of its weapons to fight Russia?
Yes, absolutely. So we're watching the conflict unfold right now. I heard, and I don't know if it's true, but the Western media is reporting that Iran is retaliating by striking Israel. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense from Iran's point of view. If they were to strike U.S. targets, it would do exactly what we both agree it would do. It would provoke this irrational reaction from the American public. There are people in the media, even unfortunately in the alternative media, that would fan that flame, and it would make Iran's problem even worse. So by attacking Israel, it forces Israel and also the United States to continue to expend air defense capabilities. This is a finite resource the U.S. has. It is incapable of manufacturing it faster than it is being expended. And these are capabilities the U.S. will need to either continue or even escalate conflict with Russia and Ukraine or anywhere else. It is also a capability the US desperately needs in order to provoke any sort of conflict and have any chance of winning against China in the Asia Pacific region. So they're raising the cost by retaliating against Israel, an extension of US military power in the region anyway. And it avoids the I would say at this point, needless provocation of giving the Trump administration exactly what it's looking for, what the policy paper from 2009 is looking for, a pretext to hand to them to widen this war, as they have already planned. They've already moved their resource. They've, if you're looking at the US military posture worldwide, since the Biden administration, they have been adjusting it ahead of this conflict that they always intended to wage against Iran.
But there is a dilemma there, though. I'm assuming that the Iranians are concerned about yeah, giving the United States a pretense and pulling the US deeper into this war. But surely they're doing nothing if this would embolden the Iranians. I mean, in the war against Russia, we saw kind of the same thing. That is, NATO had this gradual escalation by doing more powerful weapons, long-range missiles, attacks into Russia. But then Russia always had the dilemma: either they strike back and they risk a major war with NATO, or they don't. But then NATO's emboldened, and now effectively we were allowed to attack Russian cities with impunity. So, what is I have a hard time imagining Iran being willing to weaken itself in this way. It would be too cautious, even more so now than before the proxy war in Ukraine, about allowing its deterrent to be weakened. So, what do you think? Would they limit themselves to Israel? Would they attack American ships? Would they go after American bases in the Gulf states, and maybe even bringing the Gulf states against them as well? Uh, Again, there's a lot of considerations. I was wondering what your thoughts were around what Iran might be considering.
Well, you rightly bring up the dilemma that Russia faces in the US proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. But look at how their strategy has actually played out. I think many people would say they have the advantage. Ukraine's military is being ground down. The collective West is incapable of replenishing Ukrainian losses. And if it continues along the path that it's on right now, eventually the Ukrainian military will collapse. And we're watching Russia taking more territory now than ever. And they're not even trying to take territory. They're just grinding the Ukrainians down and taking territory that they're leaving, they're disappearing off of. So if you take that and you apply it to Iran, maybe there's a similar thought process taking place. If you were, I cannot rule out that they will not attack US forces eventually, but I think they would want to make it clear the US is waging all-out war against them before they start doing that. It's a very similar strategy that they have used against Israel, who has repeatedly attacked Iran. Their response has been very measured and proportional, and I think they're going to continue to do that. We have to ask ourselves realistically, what kind of damage would Iranian missile strikes do on US installations across the region? They're already trying to strike Israeli military installations, and it's hard to say what effect that has had on diminishing the tempo of Israeli operations against Iran. We're still watching Israel carry out strikes inside Iran. So this is a huge problem, and we have to remember the U.S. is not Israel. It has a global spanning military presence, and it has huge amounts of resources beyond the reach of Iranian missiles. So this is what the Iranian leadership has to take into consideration. I know a lot of people emotionally, they want to see retribution because this is just blatant injustice. This is a blatant war of aggression on top of decades of wars of aggression. And for President Trump, I think at one point he said something like Iran is the regional bully. And I mean, the audacity to say that when it has always been the United States. Everything that Iran is doing, and I've seen I've seen people who support the Trump administration, even now, saying, "Will the Iranians say death to America?" Are these people aware of what the U.S. has been doing in the region for decades and decades? Again, a region of the planet on the other side of the world where the U.S. is actually located on a map. So we just have to wait and see. I think Iran is still, unless they're extremely weak and desperate, I think they will lean more towards patience. But again, we'll just have to wait and see. They've had a lot of time to think about it. I don't know what their final conclusion will be.
How about yeah, the last issue I wanted to explore was the drawing in of external actors. You mentioned, well, obviously, I think this is important because I think both the Chinese and the Russians see this as not merely an attack on Iran, but it would also be an attack on the entire Eurasian integration model. So you mentioned the roads being built, the ports, the railroads. So the interconnectedness of the region. That if you can knock out Iran, yeah, that would weaken both the Russians and the Chinese. Um, but to what extent do you think they could be pulled in? Or I'm assuming they're supplying weapons and intelligence, but again, an assumption. But do you see any possibilities of any more direct involvement?
This is a question that I get very often. The problem that both Russia and China have is, despite US claims that they represent this global military threat, they don't actually have the ability to project significant military power anywhere beyond their immediate borders. Russia tried to in Syria, and because of the war being waged against them in Ukraine, they were overstretched and they were unable to commit to both fronts at the same time. They had to make a very difficult decision. And if they weren't able to hold up the Syrian government, I highly doubt that they have sufficient military power to intervene and make a big difference in this conflict against Iran. It would also be very dangerous because we're talking about three nuclear armed powers, if you assume Israel also has nuclear weapons, being involved in what is a much more direct conflict than the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. And then China, of course. People have to remember, China has tens of thousands of US troops all along their periphery in the Philippines, a growing footprint there, South Korea, Japan. There are also hundreds of US troops inside China itself on the island province of Taiwan, recognized under international law and officially by the US State Department as part of China. And so they have that to contend with. There are missiles pointed at them, American missiles pointed at them all along their coast, essentially. And beyond that, the US is already waging a proxy war of sorts against China itself. The destabilization of Xinjiang, that was years ago. They've gotten on top of that. There is continuous terrorism in Baluchistan, Pakistan, where they are attacking and killing Chinese engineers. The Chinese, joint Chinese-Pakistani built infrastructure. They also even attempted to kill the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. And of course, in Myanmar, which is also right on China's border, as is Pakistan, there is a US-backed proxy war taking place aimed at the central government there. The US-backed and armed terrorists in Myanmar have repeatedly attacked Chinese investments and also Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure. So they're already facing a huge threat. They have responded to these threats. They do not have the bandwidth to project military power into Iran. Whatever help they can give Iran, I would assume they've already been supplying it to them. They surely saw this coming, like others have seen it coming. So hopefully they've prepared. It is a huge blow. If Iran were to be toppled, if regime change was successful and the US created a failed state there, this would be a huge loss for multipolarism. It doesn't necessarily mean the end, but it would be a huge loss. And it's a reminder of how this is not a done deal. This is still a critical struggle, and it's not over yet.
Yeah, one thing I'm curious about though is also Pakistan, because I spoke to yeah, Colonel McGregor, and he thinks it's a possibility that Iran could, no, sorry, that Pakistan could give an actual nuclear weapon to Iran if they were struck by a tactical nuclear weapon by the Israelis. But do you, I don't know, given that they've had their tensions and they're hardly allies, I'm a bit cautious to go with that assumption. But there's other things they might do. They can assist Iran with intercepting some missile attacks, drones. Do you see the possibility of Pakistan getting pulled into this? And indeed, they have used some strong language against Israel that is suggesting that they could retaliate directly with a nuclear weapon. So, is this all talk, or it again? It's very murky. This is all new territory.
Well, that's important to keep in mind. This is all new territory. So just because it's something that hasn't happened before or something we think wouldn't happen normally, there's always the possibility. However, I was just listening to President Erdogan in Turkey condemning Israel, which we know is all just empty rhetoric. He is part of the U.S.-led alliance that has been dismembering Iranian allies across the region, leaving Iran vulnerable and isolated ahead of this attack to begin with. So is that Pakistan pandering to its own population? Following this conflict, needless conflict that they had with India. I mean, needless for both sides. I don't know. I mean, if they are providing material support, it's something you think the Western media would be complaining about and raising attention for and trying to put pressure on them to stop, just as was the case with nations providing support to Russia in America's other unprovoked proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. So I think that's something we have to wait and see. It's possible. I mean, Iran would benefit from additional ballistic missiles or maybe components or help manufacturing them or doing certain things beyond their border to prevent the US and Israel from striking and destroying these capabilities, maintaining their deterrence and helping raise the cost for the US and its Israeli proxies in this war of aggression against Iran. I mean, you would think that they would be doing that, but we have to wait and see. A lot of people doubted that Iran was helping and North Korea were helping Russia in America's proxy war against them in Ukraine. And it turned out that they were helping. So we just have to wait and see. I think it's a possibility.
Yeah. No, I I was also skeptical when I heard it first. I
Yes.
didn't think they would require it, but of course it's always good to have allies. Anyways, yeah, Brian, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain. This is I was gonna say interesting times, but more terrifying now, I guess. I don't think many people realize what has been done here. This is gonna be something very different from Iraq. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.